In 2008, California made a promise to its voters: a high-speed rail system connecting San Francisco to Los Angeles in 2 hours and 40 minutes for $33 billion, operational by the year 2020. Californians voted yes, the bond money was raised, the agency was created, the planning began, and then something happened that is either a cautionary tale about government dysfunction or a structural indictment of how the most powerful economy in human history builds things, depending on how honestly you're willing to look at it. It is now 2026. No track has been laid. Not a single mile of high-speed rail exists in California. The project's most recent cost estimate stands at $231 billion, more than 700% above the original promise to voters. The Federal Railroad Administration, after concluding that the California High-Speed Rail Authority had failed its compliance obligations in 9 distinct areas, terminated $4 billion in federal grants in July 2025. Congress rescinded another $929 million in the months that followed. Even the project's most optimistic remaining scenario, a reduced corridor between Gilroy and Palmdale, not the full San Francisco to Los Angeles route that was promised, is not expected to carry a single passenger until 2038 at the earliest, 30 years after voters approved it. A state senator on the California Senate Transportation Committee said what everyone watching from the outside had been thinking for years: this is a project that will never be built, and everybody in Sacramento knows it. Now hold those numbers in your mind, because they become the most important context for everything that follows. China opened its first high-speed rail line in 2008, the same year California's voters said yes to theirs. As of the end of 2025, China's high-speed rail network has surpassed 50,000 kilometers of operational track, carrying 4.588 billion passengers in 2025 alone. Its newest generation of trains, the CR450, achieved a test speed of 453 kilometers per hour during trials, and is being prepared for commercial service at 400 kilometers per hour. The network connects 97.2% of Chinese cities with populations above 500,000. Travel time between the 31 mainland provincial capitals fell by nearly 50% between 2012 and 2024. China builds, on average, between 2,000 and 3,000 kilometers of new high-speed track every single year, at a construction cost of 17 to 21 million US dollars per kilometer, roughly one-third lower than comparable European projects, according to a World Bank analysis. The Baotou-Yinchuan high-speed railway in Inner Mongolia, 519 kilometers connecting 2 regions that had been isolated from the national network, opened on December 23, 2025, at a total investment of 7.75 billion US dollars, or roughly $15 million per kilometer. On time, on budget, now carrying passengers. California promised its voters a railway for $33 billion. By 2026, after spending more than $18 billion, there is no track. There are concrete pillars rising from the Central Valley floor, going nowhere, connecting nothing, visible from Highway 99 to anyone willing to slow down and look. A state assemblyman described them as a monument to the gap between American aspiration and American execution. He was not wrong. Before we go any further into what this gap is actually made of, I want to say something to you directly. This channel exists for people who want to understand the world at the level where the real decisions are being made. Not the headline version, not the politically convenient version, but the version supported by evidence and honest enough to show you things that complicate your existing assumptions, whatever those assumptions are. If that is what you came here for, subscribe right now and turn on the notification bell. What we cover over the next several months is going to matter, and I want you to be here for it. Now let us go deeper, because California is not the story. California is the opening example of a pattern that runs across decades and billions of dollars of American public infrastructure. The Big Dig in Boston was supposed to cost $2.8 billion when planning began. It was supposed to be completed in 1998. It finally finished in December 2007 at a total cost of $14.6 billion, with interest $21.9 billion. The project was plagued by leaks, design flaws, substandard materials, criminal charges, and the death of a motorist. Over 200 complaints were filed by the state. 6 employees of the project's concrete supplier were arrested for reusing old concrete and double-billing loads. The Parsons-Brinkerhoff and Bechtel Consortium paid $407 million in restitution. The cost overrun alone, the gap between what was promised and what was paid, was $19 billion. $19 billion more than originally budgeted for a highway rerouting project in a single American city. The Honolulu Rail project on the island of Oahu was approved by voters in 2008, the same year as California's high-speed rail, at an estimated cost of $5.1 billion, scheduled for completion in 2020. It is now 2026. The project has received 3 separate financial bailouts from state and federal sources. Its current cost estimate stands at $12.45 billion, a 136% overrun from the original agreement. Only the western segment of the line is carrying passengers. The urban core section, which would connect commuters to downtown Honolulu, remains unfinished. There was only a single bidder for the last major construction contract, a detail that tells you something specific about the competitive dynamics of American infrastructure procurement. The entire project, for a 20-mile light rail line on a single island, will have cost more than $12 billion by the time it is complete. For comparison, China is building 519 kilometers of high-speed rail through Inner Mongolia for $7.75 billion. Honolulu is spending $12 billion on 20 miles. New York City's 2nd Avenue subway extension, a project that had been discussed since 1929, that is not a typographical error, since 1929, finally opened its first new stations in 2017, covering less than 2 miles of track, at a cost of $4.5 billion. That is roughly $2.3 billion per mile of tunnel in one of the world's most expensive cities. Researchers at New York University who studied transit construction costs globally found that New York builds subway tunnels at costs that are in some cases 5 to 10 times higher than comparable projects in European cities with similar wages, similar geology, and similar union labor. The reasons are a documented combination of fragmented procurement, siloed agency coordination, change order culture where contractors expect and receive lucrative amendments to original bids, and a political environment where no single actor has both the authority and the accountability to make binding decisions and hold them. The LaGuardia Airport AirTrain, a proposed rail connection between New York's second busiest airport and the subway system, was scrapped entirely after cost estimates inflated from $450 million to $2.4 billion for a connection that transit planners widely agreed was solving the wrong problem with the wrong solution in the wrong location. The project was canceled without a single rail ever being laid. $450 million became $2.4 billion on paper alone. The project that replaced it in the planning stages is expected to cost more and take longer. The Denver International Airport, opened in 1995, came in at nearly $2 billion over its original budget, and 16 months late, beset by a baggage system that became one of the most cited case studies in project management literature for how automated systems should not be designed, procured, or tested. The baggage system alone cost $330 million, did not function reliably for years, and was eventually shut down entirely in 2005 after absorbing costs that dwarfed its original scope. These are not outliers. Research on American urban infrastructure projects consistently finds that approximately 86% of projects exceed their original cost estimates, and 91.5% exceed either their budget or their scheduled completion date, or both. The American Society of Civil Engineers has given the United States infrastructure an overall grade of C in its most recent assessment, with roads, transit, and rail receiving some of the lowest scores. The country faces an infrastructure funding gap estimated at $1.44 trillion through 2025. Not a gap in what was needed to maintain existing infrastructure, but a gap between what was planned and what was funded. Now let us talk about what is happening on the other side of this comparison. Because the gap is not simply a story of American failure, it is also a story of Chinese execution at a scale and consistency that demands honest examination on its own terms. I want to pause here for a moment because what we are building through this video is not a simple argument that China is better than America at everything. That is not what the evidence shows, and it is not what this channel is about. What the evidence shows is something more specific and more interesting. A structural difference in how these two systems approach the problem of building at scale, and what that difference costs in real money and real time. If you are finding this valuable, subscribe to this channel and share this video with one person who you believe thinks seriously about these questions. The comment section on this video should be the most substantive conversation about American infrastructure capability that YouTube has hosted. Now let us build that case properly. China's construction cost advantage is real, and it is documented. The World Bank's analysis of Chinese high-speed rail found unit costs of 17 to 21 million US dollars per kilometer for lines designed for 350 km per hour operation, including a higher than average ratio of viaducts and tunnels, which are among the most expensive components of any rail project. European equivalents run 25 to 39 million per kilometer. American transit construction in dense urban environments regularly exceeds 100 million per kilometer. The sources of China's cost advantage are not mysterious. Standardization of design and procurement reduces the variability that drives cost overruns in Western projects. State-owned construction companies operating at scale achieve bulk purchasing advantages on steel, concrete, and signaling systems that private contractors bidding individually cannot match. Labor costs, while rising, remain lower than in developed Western economies. And, crucially, A political and regulatory environment that can make binding land acquisition decisions quickly and enforce them consistently removes one of the primary sources of delay that adds billions to American projects before a single shovel of earth is turned. None of this means that China's infrastructure system is without costs or contradictions. The China State Railway Group had accumulated debt estimated at $839 billion by the end of 2023, financed through opaque arrangements with local governments that have contributed significantly to China's local government debt crisis. Many high-speed rail lines in sparsely populated western regions operate well below their designed capacity, raising legitimate questions about whether the economic returns justify the construction costs in every case. Ghost infrastructure, projects built ahead of population and economic activity that have not yet justified the investment, is a real phenomenon in parts of China's network. The Beijing to Shanghai high-speed line, which opened in 2011 at a cost of approximately $33 billion for 1,318 kilometers, took several years to reach profitability, though it now reports annual net profits in excess of 6.6 billion yuan. 6 years after licensing the Shinkansen design from Kawasaki, Chinese engineers had learned enough to produce the equivalent without Japanese technical input, a technology absorption trajectory that no other country has replicated at that speed. But here is the number that does not have a comparable Chinese counterpart. $18 billion spent in California with no track, no train, no passenger. That is not a system with debt and underutilized lines. That is an $18 billion expenditure that produced a collection of concrete columns standing in agricultural fields and a legal dispute about whether the remaining route can even comply with the ballot measure that authorized the project in the first place. The question that honest analysis forces you to ask is not which country has a better infrastructure system in absolute terms. The honest question is, what is the specific mechanism that turns American ambition into American delay and American funding into American cost overruns? Because the money exists. The United States is the wealthiest large economy in the history of human civilization. The technical knowledge exists. American universities train the engineers who design infrastructure systems around the world. The political will, at least initially, demonstrably exists. California voters said yes. Honolulu voters said yes. Congress has passed infrastructure spending bills worth hundreds of billions of dollars. The problem is not the origin of the project. The problem is everything that happens between the vote and the train. Research from NYU's Marin Institute, Columbia's Center for Urban Real Estate, and the Manhattan Institute has identified a consistent set of mechanisms. American infrastructure projects are procured in fragmented stages. Design separated from build separated from operate, which means no single contractor has responsibility for the whole outcome, and every interface between stages becomes a potential source of dispute, delay, and cost inflation. The lowest bid procurement system mandated by most federal funding agreements selects contractors based on their initial price rather than their demonstrated track record, which creates systematic incentives to underbid and then recoup costs through change orders during construction. Environmental and historical review processes, while important in purpose, have become in practice the most reliably effective mechanism for stopping projects or delaying them for years through litigation. One change to the California high-speed rail route, made to gain a single county supervisor's political support, added $8 billion to the project's cost. The Hawaii Rail project was halted for more than a year because archaeological surveys required by a court ruling had not been completed before construction began. The utility relocation on a single Honolulu boulevard proved so complex that it shut down an entire construction segment for 9 months. The individual reason for each delay is defensible in isolation. Archaeological surveys should be conducted. Environmental reviews should happen. Community voices should be heard. The cumulative effect of a system where every one of these processes can be litigated, where no agency has the authority to make a binding final decision, and where the cost of delay is absorbed into public budgets rather than contractor performance bonds, that cumulative effect is what turns a $33 billion promise into a $231 billion embarrassment over the course of 18 years. Now here's the part that most videos on this subject will not tell you because it complicates the clean narrative. America is not uniformly incapable of building infrastructure. The interstate highway system, built between the 1950s and 1990s, remains one of the most consequential infrastructure achievements in human history. 80,000 kilometers connecting a continent, executed in an era before modern environmental review, modern procurement law, or modern litigation culture had created the procedural architecture that now governs every project. The Tennessee Valley Authority built 30 dams between 1933 and 1944. The Golden Gate Bridge was completed in 4 years. The Empire State Building went up in 1 year and 45 days in 1930 and 1931. America has not forgotten how to build. It has built an institutional and legal infrastructure around building that makes certain kinds of large-scale construction systematically difficult in ways that did not exist when the most celebrated American infrastructure was created. China's political system makes land acquisition fast, litigation rare, and political opposition to major infrastructure projects effectively impossible. These are not features that come without their own costs, and those costs are paid by people who have no choice in the matter. The residents displaced by the Three Gorges Dam Reservoir, an estimated 1.3 million people, did not vote on whether to leave. The farmers whose land is acquired for high-speed rail corridors negotiate within a framework where the government's right to take the land is not in question. Speed and accountability and execution are real advantages of China's system. They are purchased at a price that a democratic society should be honest about rather than simply envying the output. The honest framing of the comparison this video presents is not that China has solved infrastructure and America has failed. It is that the gap between what China spends and what it builds, and what America spends and what it builds, represents a specific structural question about American governance that the country has not yet decided to answer. $18 billion in California for 0 miles of track. $12.45 billion in Honolulu for 20 miles of light rail. $22 billion for the Big Dig in Boston, with criminal charges and a fatality along the way. Billions for environmental reviews, for archaeological surveys, for legal challenges, for change orders, for procurement processes that select contractors on price rather than capability. These are not random accidents. They are the predictable outputs of a system that has been constructed over decades to prioritize process over outcome, distributed authority over decisive action, and legal protection for every stakeholder over accountability for any particular result. China spent $2 billion and built a 500-kilometer high-speed rail line that opened on time and carries passengers today. America spent $18 billion and has concrete pillars in a valley. The question is not which country is smarter, or which country works harder, or which country has better engineers. The question is, what does a society have to believe about itself, about accountability, about the relationship between democratic process and practical results in order to close a gap this large? That is not a question that has a clean answer, but it is a question that deserves to be asked out loud at full volume in every conversation about American competitiveness for the foreseeable future. If you are still here, I want to thank you in the most direct way I can. You just spent 16 minutes on one of the most uncomfortable comparisons in American public life. Not comfortable because it confirms what you already believed, and not comfortable because it asks you to hold the evidence honestly, regardless of which direction it points. That is exactly the kind of thinking this channel was built to support. So here is the question I want you to take into the comments below. Do you believe America's infrastructure cost and delivery problem is fixable within the current democratic and legal framework? And if so, what is the one specific change that would matter most? One reform, one sentence of reasoning. The best answers in this comment section will shape a follow-up video dedicated entirely to solutions, sourced from the people watching this one. Subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share this video with one person you respect enough to want in this conversation. I will see you in the next one.